Hello. A few weeks ago I did a short video about Colin Wilson. I was looking mainly at his ideas of the peak experiences, which were encapsulated in one of his later books called Super Consciousness. Since that time I've been reading a bit more about his life, mainly online to be honest, and I've watched a few YouTube videos about him. One day I was on Facebook, and because I think I follow a couple of Colin Wilson Facebook groups, I came across a quote from someone called Marion Williamson. It's quite an old quote, came from 2003, and I followed the quote to the source at this blog written by this person, Marion Williamson. She interviewed Colin Wilson in 2003 in Cornwall. And something struck me, I thought it was quite amusing in this interview. Now, Colin Wilson was in this interview said he was obsessed with the idea of the peak experience. Which is what I talked about before. And to quote from this interview directly, Colin Wilson said, "I've written the same book 100 times over. The same basic ideas always obsess me, and I approach them from completely different angles. For example, I wrote a book on wine because I suspected that wine had been one of the most important evolutionary advances of the human race." So I read that, and I've read quite a lot of Colin Wilson books, and I'm aware of most of them, but I'd never come across about his book on wine, so I thought I'd look that up. So I went online, I found this book, which I think this is the book he's referring to, which is called The Book of Booze. I ordered it from AB Books, and I read it. I've been reading it over the last few weeks, and it's very entertaining, so I just wanted to say a few things about that. It is interesting that Colin Wilson admitted in that interview about he keeps writing the same book. I think that was the point I made before on his book, The Super Consciousness, but there's no problem with that at all. You know, I think he's quite an entertaining writer. So anyway, Colin Wilson, I think I read somewhere else that Colin Wilson himself said he'd only got 100 books about wine, and he said, so he hardly knows anything at all. But for most people, 100 books on one subject, especially something as specific of wine, would probably almost give him expert status. But he's got a library of something like 30,000 books, so I guess it's a minor interest for him compared to other things. Anyway, what's the book about? The Book of Booze. It's kind of, as you'd expect, it's a history of alcohol, really, and in a history of drinking. So he starts, which the first few chapters I think are the most interesting, where he looks at a lot of ancient cultures: Persia, Greece, Rome, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and so on, these ancient cultures, and he describes how it appears that alcohol was first sort of discovered, possibly by accident, with people leaving out grapes or making a juice out of grapes or other fruit and finding it fermented, drinking it and experiencing odd things happening to them. And then they thought, oh, quite like this, let's see what we can do. There out of there came, beer, wine, etc., etc. So I really love the ancient stuff. He goes into Greece, Dionysian kind of things. It's really, really interesting. How people in Rome, alcohol was very big in Roman times. Everyone was drinking wine. How alcohol is used in various ways. It appears, I think it was the Persians or the Mesopotamians, he says they just drank purely to get drunk for the feeling of it, whereas other cultures might have used it in sort of religious rites or sort of in more spiritual ways. And he comes up, as Colin Wilson always does in all of his books, he just comes up with really interesting anecdotes and facts. There's one interesting one, for example, I noted about ancient Rome, when some of the German tribes, the Goths or whatever, from Germany were being rather troublesome in the northern part of the empire, and according to Colin Wilson, where the Romans had sort of developed their vineyards and so forth, and their expertise in growing wine, and they helped these German tribes develop their own vineyards around the Rhine. And with that, the German people allegedly became much, much more peaceful, and it was a way that Rome sort of controlled some of their, the outer parts of their empire. Well, that was quite interesting. In very Colin Wilson ways, he comes out with quite sweeping statements, not really based on that much evidence, which are either amusing if you like that kind of thing, or if you're sort of an academic. This is probably why you say, well, Colin Wilson comes out with this stuff which has no basis in evidence. So he'll say something like, "It is a pity Wittgenstein drank water. He would have had even more to say about the inadequacy of language if he had tried writing about wine." So it's quite interesting. Think about, yes, if Wittgenstein was drunk a bit more, you know, he probably would have been more readable and more entertaining, that's for sure. The middle part of the book is the least interesting bit, really. Colin Wilson talks about kind of the wine, what his experience of drinking wines and the wines of Europe as they were in he wrote the book in 1973. So people in 2020 might think, oh yeah, I don't think 1973 was a vintage time for wine. Where does he make... yes, and there's an interesting quote on page 140. This is a quote very much of his time. "And so I conclude with a certain unwillingness that Saintsbury and Maurice Healey and Morton Shand and Alexis Lichine are right when they imply that the only wines worth knowing about are French and German. Given that nowadays most people are drinking Australian, South African, Argentinian, Chilean, etc., Californian wines, that's probably a bit of an outdated comment." Anyway, he goes on and he talks about beer. He talks about, he has the history of how alcohol in Britain, which is it's quite entertaining. How, you know, how gin became a massive thing in the Georgian times, and he talks about his own travels around pubs and so on and so forth in Cornwall. It's all it's very entertaining. And then he ends up with a typically kind of grandiose comment, the last couple of pages, where he says, "I have a theory which, if true, constitutes the most powerful argument in favour of alcohol. I have to admit I'm not wholly convinced by it, but it is plausible and will make a fitting conclusion to this book." And he goes on to say, "Could it be entirely coincidence that this change, either the change in man from being quite unsophisticated into what he says Rodin's thinker, could it be entirely coincident this change has taken place since man discovered how to ferment alcohol about 8000 BC? And then final couple of chapters. "It is, I agree, conceivable that philosophers and poets would have evolved without the aid of wine. Young men fall in love and enjoy spring mornings. Thoughtful men fall into meditation as they sit on a fence and stare at the sunset. But surely our evolution would have been much slower without this instantaneous lightener of burdens. Wine creates detachment, a sense of potentiality, the worlds of if, and this in turn creates optimism and courage, the prime necessity for evolution." And on that, I think we can all go and pour ourselves a glass of wine, and thank you for listening.